Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Wood, Air, and Metal podcast episode.
Metal, yeah.
Yeah, it's metal. That works.
Oh,
It
that's
works as
right.
well. So, you know. So again, I'm Adam Keeler, and classical guitarist, playing for about 30 years. Tim Mirth on the other side of the screen.
Some days I feel like I just started playing.
Oh God, yeah. Been one of those days, huh? I guess we could kind of start out with a segue into that, just a little bit about we've both been playing an exorbitant amount of years. That when I first started playing, I always was like, how the hell can you be doing something for 20 years? And then now I'm sitting at the 30-year mark of playing, and it's like, okay, it's not as hard as I thought it was going to be. Maybe it's definitely an obsession. It's definitely the self-challenge.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I hate that, play gigs or whatever, and people say, oh, you're so talented or whatever. And I think, well, it's been 30 years of practicing, like not missing days, and
Yep.
It's generally more than 3 or 4 hours, and there was a time when it was easily 8 hours a day, for a long stretch. So I'm always like, well, if you practice for 8 hours a day for 10 years, you'll probably be a lot better than me. So I don't know, is that talent? I don't know. Maybe it's perseverance and like endless obsession.
Yeah, that was a thing that they talked about, like with having to be like they studied the quote unquote childhood prodigies, and basically came to the conclusion that they just practiced more. That's it. I mean, that's all that the kids did, and so they did. It was at Juilliard, so they had the kids at Juilliard. And like all of them are clearly, if you're in Juilliard, you're no slouch. And but they found out that the kids that were deemed prodigies were literally in the practice room more than the other kids.
Right.
That was it. And there. Since we're going to be talking about teaching, anyways, that whole 10,000 hour rule is somewhat applicable, but it's also what you do in those 10,000 hours.
Sure.
Like it's more of a direction and focus base, like where are you headed, how you're challenging yourself, and how is your practice laid out, rather than just matter of fact of this amount of block of time.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw that video I did a few weeks ago. I had some people, they were asking me like my practice regimen.
Oh yeah.
But the main point for me was you got to practice stuff you suck at, and that 10,000 hours. The reason it's sort of a weird thing, and some people get really mad about it, and they're like, it's not really true or whatever. But you got to practice. If you practice 10,000 hours of stuff you're not any good at, then yeah, you're gonna make a ton of progress. But if all you do is practice a C major chord or something, whatever it is, you'll be really good at that, but you won't get good at anything else, right? You got to practice what you don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I read an interview with it was definitely Steve Vai, but he said something along the lines of like, I always focus on my strengths. I never really practice.
I did see that, which is an interesting thought process too. But
exactly.
You don't really know what that is when you first start. I don't think, probably.
Yeah. Yep. I think that there's clearly a general level of musicianship that needs to be attained before you can make executive calls as, okay, this needs work, this doesn't need work, I'm successful with these particular things, I'm not successful with that. And that's where the teaching aspect kind of comes in. I
always think when you have a good teacher, it's like it saves you so much time.
Yes.
Like if you were to figure it out all on your own, so when I started playing, I didn't have a teacher. My parents didn't really know. They were music fans, but they didn't know anything about music really. And I would beg for lessons, and at least the first 6 years I played, I couldn't get lessons, and so I had to learn everything on my own. I was just teaching myself, and you can learn a lot that way, and especially if you're just completely obsessed with it, which I was.
Yeah, same.
But it's man, you get that when I finally got to take some lessons with a really good teacher, a great guitar player too. It's he showed me one thing, I think the first lesson or something, and I was already decent, I guess. I wasn't a beginner at this point, so it's 6 years in, and it was man, just thinking how much time you just saved me, because I would have tried to figure that out, and I would have mapped all this stuff out and did this whole thing, and you were able to explain it in 30 seconds, And it was like that, you just save all this time with the good
Yeah.
teachers, you know. And that's really the magic of it. But a bad teacher can be the other maybe the opposite.
Oh yeah, totally. Like that's literally what I was just driving at. Like emphasis on the word good teacher, because there are bad teachers, and I don't want to make like an executive call, but I've definitely seen a lot worse than better. Especially when it comes to guitar. I don't think that happens so much when it goes with like violin or more of the
well, at least on fundamentals, probably, right?
Yeah.
Because so many guitar players started like I did.
Yes, exactly.
6 years with no lesson. And then I was good enough to teach people stuff. But I probably had no right to teach anybody stuff, you know?
I started teaching guitar when I was like, 10 years into it, 10 or 12. Then I felt pretty confident about teaching some stuff with that. And then even by then, I didn't have like formalized lessons till I'd been playing almost 20 years. No. Yeah, about 13, 15 years in is when I started getting formal lessons. So like formalized lessons. I'm counting Pierre, but I'm not counting Pierre because it wasn't weeks for years. It was like, an intensive thing for X amount of time. So that's like it's not the same format as weekly. You're going in, you have continual goals and so on. Or at least if you have a good teacher, it's that way. Like I had one guy that was getting me prepped for my college audition, and just throwing constant amounts of music at me to get my sight reading better. But that was pretty much it. Nothing in terms of technique or anything. But when I started with Steve, Pierre was huge in technique. Like that was like when we sat down, he gave us a 3-hour lesson a day. So, the first hour of it was nothing but technical stuff. He was like, this is what we're doing. And, we had to all be in DADGAD and doing all this arpeggio work, which it was really helpful. It was great. But it wasn't until I got into actual formalized lessons with Steve where it was like, oh, okay, here's the goal, here's what to work on, this is things need to change, and it was very, very same idea. It's like, oh, if I would have known that like years ago, the progress would have been much. But that leads to kind of what we were talking about last time with the whole like accessibility to things on YouTube and Instagram and else. That if you're looking and you're finding the right videos, it is dramatically helpful. But the only problem is I've seen a lot of the videos and it's like, or not. Maybe you shouldn't listen to this particular guy. Or, those guys.
At least I guess it's like you could find 20 videos on the same topic.
Exactly.
Like if you want to learn how to play a song or something, which I haven't really done, so I'm sort of speculating here. I kind of see them pop up or whatever, but it's like, I want to learn how to play a Coldplay song or something. There's probably 30, 40, 100 videos on how to do it.
Yep.
And I would think like a diligent student who really wanted to learn it, if it didn't quite sound right or something like that, the first one they did, they would just look up the next one.
I actually just had a student do that. Like, and she's in, I want to say high school now, I think. Just getting to high school. Classical student. And we had like the last like month off just because of Christmas break and everything else, and she started back up again. And she's like, oh yeah, I learned this Beatles tune. She wanted to do While My Guitar Gently Weeps, like a solo version of it. And so she watched this guy on the internet teaching it and sent me a link, and I looked at it and I was like, well, he's not wrong in any of his notes. Like it was all there, it was fine. But the problem is the way that he was teaching it and the way that she was applying it, more so the way that he was being taught, not necessarily how she was applying it, was very note by note, so that she was like hopping all over. Instead of like playing this, or there was this D minor chord in there, she was, instead of doing that, she was going, instead of thinking ahead, because it's laid out in tablature. So if you're not thinking stacking the notes and forming the chord, you're thinking, okay, 3, 2, 3, 1, and getting the notes. So it was that was one of the big things that it was just like, maybe not all these guys are so good. And he's not wrong, but pedagogically, teaching style wise, it just wasn't explained enough in the video. And so like I sat down with her, and with her in the first 10 minutes of the lesson, I'm like, okay, we need to look at this in terms of chords rather than just notes. And the way that this is laid out with the tablature isn't going to help you, so let's ditch that. And luckily I had this Beatles classical guitar arrangement book that's relatively accessible for where, so there'll be a little bit of work with that, but just enough to kind of be like, all right, you're going to have to work to get this part down. It's not going to be there. And so she was playing it, or we started working on it right away, and she started picking it up, and she's like, oh, this is so much easier when I'm looking at the music and getting it, like understanding everything that's going to happen rather than the tablature. And I'm like, yep, that's the point. That's why I push you. Yeah, it's not the cool hip thing of tablature, but the reason why the notes are there, and when you get them, the level of your playing goes right up. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I haven't met anybody that's a decent sight reader or reader in general that hasn't been like an absolutely fantastic player because of the understanding that brings. Not that you can't base everything around tab and be a good player. There's clearly guys out there.
So I'm curious. So do you use tab ever in your lessons?
Yes, but it's usually begrudgingly. Like I'll do tablature if, well, let's separate two of the things. So I'm teaching at the collegiate level, and then I have like a private studio on the outside of that. Yeah. And the private studio, I'm a little bit more lenient with using tablature to teach, using internet resources to teach with, because it's what's the way to put it? There's no grades hanging over their heads. You know what I mean? It's not like there's going into school and trying to get something particularly done. It's more of an enjoyment thing. At least some of this, it's always a mix. There's some of them where it's always an enjoyment thing. Some of them really want to get into it and get good. Other ones just want to kind of do it because their parents are particularly pushing them into it, or whichever, however that goes. So you have that on the private studio, but the collegiate thing is like, when everybody's in there, they are like, they have to do something, and I have to give them a particular goal and a standard to judge them by. So that shifts the teaching method at the collegiate to being a lot more strict about, we're learning the notes, we're going here, this is what you're supposed to do, that's it, and the goals at teaching with the collegiate thing need to be accessible for everybody. So like the talented kid that's been playing for 10 years can't just like show up and be like, oh, this is an easy A, got it, and walk out. I want it to the same amount of climbing relative to their position. So whether you're a beginning or you've been playing for 10 years, you're going to have X amount of work to get to that next level, to where I can give you the A with that.
Now, I feel like
whoa.
Oh, I see what happened
here. I fell in a well, but I got better.
So I'm using the Helix over here.
Oh, nice.
It's really convenient because I can plug the guitar and everything into it. But the one of the knobs, it's so easy to just like bump it, and it bumped. I was trying to, so there's a noise gate on here because I took it off because the last podcast, it was kind of like fading in and out, and I haven't spent enough time to like nail in the right threshold. So I was trying to turn it on there for a second, but then I just ended up turning it off anyway.
Either way, where were we? Oh yeah, the chords and the tab.
I was going to say, I'm curious if I always thought, so I don't teach in college or anything like that. And I don't really even teach that much anymore. It's really kind of rare. But I always thought, well, if I had my own studio at a college or something, I have all these ideas of how I would run it. And of course, they're all grandiose, and it probably doesn't work in reality. But I'm curious, you were mentioning, like, so sometimes you have like the beginner level sort of students, and then you have like the more advanced students. If they were all at grade level 1, let's say, or whatever, first year, if the person is like, how do you do that with the good student and the beginner student? Because like, you want to sort of create a reputation for your program that you're putting out A grade people. So obviously the more talented or more, I didn't like the word use talent, but the more experienced player is going to be better.
Yeah.
And at the end of the first year, still going to be better, most likely. And presumably you would want to give them an A as long as they weren't like slacking off. But there's basically no way those beginner students could ever get to the level that determined first year, experienced student. So could they ever get an A? Like
Well,
they get an A for effort, even though they're not as good. It's kind of a funny line to me. I wonder.
and no, that's a great question to do that. And I would say absolutely you get the A for effort, but it's not just effort. It's a matter of accomplishing reasonable goals with an expectation on that I put the expectation on. It's like if somebody comes together into the guitar lessons without ever touching the instrument before, which just happened, and it usually does, because the nice thing about the college is you have to take an art credit, so the guitar counts for it, so they signed up for lessons.
Yeah.
So I'll have somebody that has like never had any musical experience whatsoever and sit down with a guitar for the first time. So in order for them to achieve an A, it's getting through all the notes on the fretboard, by the end of the semester, 13 weeks give or take, of weekly set out. Like I give them the book, we go through like the Frederick Node solo guitar playing, and if you get to page 49, which is this piece called the Spanish Study, I want them to be able to play it. That's an A level playing. Like, if you get close to it, you can get a B. If you get halfway through it, I'm not doing my job, or you're not practicing, one of the two. It's a relatively easy goal to accomplish first semester, and things ratchet up from there. Depending on how serious they're going to go with things, we'll go into the Stanley Yates graded repertoire, which starts relatively really easy, but when we're in that, it's like a piece a week. It's like you're cranking these things out, and then we go into some Giuliani studies and so on, and just start to kind of run it.
So did they specifically sign up for classical guitar lessons then?
It's a both and. Yes, and they do, and some do strict classical, some do just guitar. Yeah. And regardless, if it's a beginning thing, either in classical or strict guitar, unless they're trying to do electric guitar, it's even if they're doing electric guitar, it's all reading in the first position. Like, absolutely, they got to be able to do it. And I have that. There's a book called I'm gonna forget the name till I see the cover of it, which is somewhere over here. But there's a book that I use that I put for their final exam. Is I think it's called Sight Reading Studies for the Classical Guitar, and it's literally random notes on a page. Like it has a staff, but no treble clef, and it's just not note heads. So you can sit there and read it, and the thing that it's great for is literally just learning to read the music, because music in one sense, if you're playing in C, you can start, you just can kind of tell where things are going to go because of the way that music works harmonically, especially at that level. You're not going to get some crazy old atonal thing, but with that in mind, this book has it so that none of those patterns really apply. Like it's literally like the guy just took like a note shotgun and went poosh on the page, and you have it. But they all sit in the first position, and then after 10 exercises in the first position, then 10 in the second position, then 10 in the third, and it goes all the way up to 12th position. So it's really great to see how they're reading.
So have you ever met anyone? I guess I'm going to be in question asking mode today. Because I've never met anyone, I don't think, that's actually gone through the books and got past like 5th position. Maybe 7th, maybe get to 7th. I've literally never seen anyone, unless so there's like the William Levitt books and stuff that came from Berkeley and stuff, and people kind of they'll learn 7th position, and it's sort of it's not billeting from here. It's more, pick a spot and sort of memorize it. But I know a lot of the more classical repertoire, it's learning from here and then kind of adding to it. And I don't think I've ever met anyone that I knew ever succeed in getting through all the books to wherever it gets to 14th position or what, or something, I don't think I've ever, because they'll have book 1, which is first position, and book 2 is the first couple positions, and book 3 is whatever, and there's book 8, but no one's ever got to book 8. Is there any good material in book 8? And maybe you've done it.
I mean, I know if we take Suzuki's method, by book 9 you're playing Leyenda, Asturias.
Book 1 in Suzuki, you're playing some pretty cool stuff.
pretty cool, but nothing super hard. Like
Yeah.
I've looked through all of them, and like book 5 has the preludes from the PFA, the Prelude Fugue and Allegro by Bach, in there, and just a prelude because I mean, and it's all appropriate material. Like they really did a good job, and I love the way that they have it spread out with that and their piece selection. But like by the last book, it's like holy cow, you're playing like competition level pieces.
Oh, yeah, right. Well, actually, I've probably seen the guitar ones, but when I started violin a couple years ago, that I got some of the Suzuki books, which is great because there's just endless good like music in it too. And I was just kind of laughing. I'm like, here's book 1, and you're already playing like this cool music by the end of the book. I think there's even like some Bach or something at the end. And I'm like, in guitar, like you don't get there for like 5 years. It just seemed like, here's a 5-year-old doing this in Suzuki and violin or whatever. It just kind of made me laugh.
I think that's more of it, how idiosyncratic it is to the instrument. Bach didn't write for guitar, so whenever music, it's like
it was cool. It was like, man, like this is a really nice piece of music, not the E, F, G or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. But that's the great thing about the way that this one, at least the first Suzuki, is laid out. Like, it's still all in first position, but it's good music. It's like, oh, okay, this is kind of nice. It has a nice. It's not that all Hale Leonard is bad, but by the Hale Leonard books, just the musical selection is.
So I'm curious. So what books then do you recommend that you start students with? So the beginner student, starting day 1.
What, college or is private?
Yes.
All right. For college,
do you treat it differently in that case?
Yeah, absolutely. So
even though I don't mean like, so you have a college newbie who's never played guitar, you treat that different than a newbie that comes to your private studio?
Yes, and the main reason the distinction is this: in the college thing, it's either I have to grade them, or it's not either, but I have to grade them. I have to give them a particular goal, and they're working in an academic setting. So the mindset is totally different.
Oh, so you're saying in a private, if they want to play Satriani tunes or something, and that's their goal, you'll change the way that you teach them to get to that goal.
Exactly.
Where in college, it's like, well, you have to have a curriculum, so they're following the curriculum.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so let's hear. I'm curious, because people ask me this all the time, and I kind of gave up on a lot of books. So when I did teach a lot, I would tell everybody to get a blank manuscript book, and I wrote everything out.
See, I used to do that, but it was just getting tedious. Like I'd fill up 15 minutes of their lesson with writing stuff in, not getting anywhere. And so I did the same thing. It was like I grabbed, like I got the Levitt books, I got the Stanley Yates book, I got the Frederick Node method book, the Aaron Shearer, and probably a bunch of other stuff that I could look around my office and kind of pull out and be like all these other books.
Yeah.
The one that I settled on for the collegiate level was the Node books, like the solo guitar playing. It does a great job. There's enough selections of pieces in it at a beginning levels that you can continually play and climb up and get a lot of experience with. Like one of the big things that my pet peeves in some of the books is that there's not enough at any particular note grouping that they give you. So if they give you like E, F, and G, you get like 2 pages of those notes, and then they're adding more, which granted, it's only 3 notes, so it's not that hard, but I'd like more in terms of like E, F, and G. This is a quarter notes. Here's 8th notes. Here's a triplet. Here's 16th notes. Like learning to work with the rhythms and so on, because that's the one gripe in all the books that I've seen. There is not enough time spent on rhythm. Not enough, especially for players. I mean, and I'm coming from getting my butt kicked, being self-taught, and then playing with a bass player, phenomenal guy, Seth Duran. Great singer-songwriter. I think you met Seth when he came to.
Saw him play too. Great.
Yeah, great. So when I first played with him, it was like the most embarrassing thing on the planet, because he's like, "Do you own a metronome?" And I'm like, "What's a metronome?" He's like, "You go buy a metronome. Go and learn to practice." Because my timing was just god awful. All I was doing was imitating what was coming off of the album. I didn't have a sense of like what a beat was or how to keep it. I just thought it was like, oh, I'll just play with the drums, which isn't necessarily wrong, but there's an awareness that happens when you're educated the right way in rhythm, that it's like, oh, okay, that's what this is. And that takes a lot of tension out of playing. But so when he came in and just kind of like nailed me on that, I there's never a time where I'm practicing the metronome isn't clicking to some.
Yeah.
So when I'm teaching, the reason I'm bringing that up is like I see that total lack of that in any educational resource. It's like there's no huge amount of time spent on developing an inner sense of pulse and counting and all these things that I'd love to see fleshed out, which is part of like I've had an idea in the back of my head of writing my own curriculum with that in particular thing being the big thing. It's like, yeah, I know it's E, F, and G and it's 3 notes, but here's 10 pages of it. And we're going through the rhythms and you're going to get a grip on this thing and you're going to count out loud. And then we'll add the next notes in and the same idea. Because I think that if there's a super strong rhythmic foundation, everything else becomes easier.
Sure.
Like,
Definitely.
clearly. So that's like my only pet peeve with the books. And the notebook happens to be good enough where it gives them enough to where it's leveled appropriately where I don't feel like I have to add too much. I still add stuff. Like I'll pull pieces out and give them other material, but that one is stapled or stepwise enough that it totally fits really well with where they're at. And everybody's got their own little shtick in terms of like what they prefer to teach out of, you know. And when it comes to private lessons, it all depends on where they want to go. Like the first lesson is generally show me what you can do, show me what you want to do, what do you like to listen to, and kind of gauge it from there, and then aim them in that direction. It's a lot more flexible. You know, I'm still serious about what I'm teaching, and I think that's the big thing that separates good teachers from bad teachers. Is like the good teachers are yeah, we want to make money to eat, but we give a darn about the music. Like I don't people just slack with that, and because I think that also gives them a gooder. Wow, there's my English degree coming out. Gives them a better sense of accomplishment and a correct sense of self-esteem. It's like, yeah, I can do these things. So my big thing with the private students is usually giving them the best set of tools to be able to do what they want to do on the instrument. You know, like I have 2 students right now that are actors primarily, and they're doing stuff for an actor troupe that is going to involve the guitar. And they're like, hey, can you come in and give me some coaching on this? So my mindset for teaching them is completely different than a college student or even a private student, because it's like they have X thing and limited amount of time to get to that point to be able to perform their part. So I lesson plan and come up with, okay, these are the things that you need to accomplish first, then we'll do this then. And it still incorporates rhythm, which is like the fundamental thing that I start with. Everybody gets the Soundburner app, you know, it's like, let's use this to keep time, rhythm, strumming, you know, and then whatever the pieces with that. And that, like today, I just taught somebody and it went fantastic. Like they already had a general feel on how to play the chords and so on, but the timing was just not there. And when you're not exposed to it, that's just the way that it is. You know, if you've never sat with a metronome or a click, it's
well, I mean, guitar is just kind of a pain, right? When you first start, you were just talking about the person with the D minor chord, and they're thinking like 1, 2, 3, whatever, because it's so physically demanding at first.
Yep.
It's really hard, or if you didn't have somebody showing you or like just making rhythm the big thing, you would learn to play a D minor chord the slowest, most out of time way possible, right?
Yes, exactly.
It's just like trying to accomplish it.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds me of Victor Wooten. You know, he basically like started as a kid. His whole family was musical, and he's sitting there, you know, when he's 3 years old, and somebody gives him a guitar or a bass or something, and they're like, just play rhythm, you know, and he's just sitting there going, you know, why they're jamming out, and like so that became the foundation for how he learned everything. The rhythm always came first. Then he would add a note, you know, after that. Now you get one note, but you're playing rhythm, you know. And now but we never think like that in guitars, and none of the books teach like that either, right? They always teach like learn these notes, and violin and all the Western really European kind of instruments, they all start that way too. They don't start with rhythm first, which is kind of a disservice, really, you know, especially in our modern music, which is very rhythmically driven. You know?
Exactly. It makes you curious to look more into like the Eastern Indian music.
Yeah, and I think everyone there, when you look at people from India, they all count, right? They
Yeah,
all learn conical.
they count it a different way than we would count it in our
Yeah.
Western system.
Yeah, I mean,
But
every instrument learns conical or whatever, some version of that. I can't tell, like north versus south or whatever. I don't remember, but yeah, it's like they start counting first. Doesn't matter what instrument you play. Everybody
yeah,
knows how to count, and they
yep.
can do really interesting rhythmic things.
Like that guy, I forget his name, but with the hand counting with the fingers.
Yeah. Oh, that's like that got big on YouTube or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, but
that was,
everybody does that. I have a cool John McLaughlin video because John went to India for years. He actually moved there and lived there and studied with different gurus and stuff because he was doing the Shakti stuff and he's really interested in it. And he felt like it would be disrespectful to not learn the rules and
mhm.
stuff the right way. Now, he wasn't really intending to stick to them necessarily because he's a jazz musician by heart, and he was going to incorporate it into his thing, but he wanted to know what the rules were. But anyway, there's a video and it's got him and like Zakir Hussain and a couple other, I think it's Zakir's in it. Um, but yeah, they go through the whole conical, like how he learned it, and they do this really cool like clapping thing too, which is like, man, we should really take advantage of this. Which is like you put your this finger down when you clap, so that's 1, 2. Now you have 2 fingers down, 3, 4, and you could do 5 or whatever. So you're always doing that when you're counting. You can do this thing, so you have multiple things happening when you're counting, and then you learn the different syllables. Like it's funny because I've heard different syllables, so I don't. It must be a north, south, east, west, or whatever. But in this video, it was like ta was the one, and then taka taka taka, or if it's triplets, it'd be like taka 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 ta, or any group of 3 really. It doesn't have to be triplets necessarily. Or then Takadimi, Takajuno, and Danagita Dum. So it's pretty neat. Actually, it's really helpful. I play in a couple groups, um, and with a guy Paul Stranahan, who's really into like these rhythmic illusions and stuff. And both of us write some really hard stuff. And there's so many, yeah. So there's a lot of these like weird time things, and sometimes I don't know, like you, no matter how good you get at reading, like reading something in like 2916 or something is not. I can't just sight read it a lot of times, especially if it's not just like straight through, and there's some rhythmic variation through it. But it really helps. I find like using that, even when I don't like, I'm really not that good at it, but it's such a useful tool to learn. Like, oh, okay, that was a group of 3, then there's a rest of 2 beats, and you can really like map the thing out and like kind of count through it. Because when you try to count like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, seven's a horrible syllable. It's like the double syllable thing. So just those kind of things, like you get good at using it, and it becomes a very useful tool to just learn how to play stuff sometimes, especially hard stuff.
Yeah, well, I tell my students all the time, if you can count it and say it, you can play it.
Yeah.
If you can't count it out loud and you can't say it with your mouth, you're not going to be able to pick up a guitar and just do it. It doesn't work like that.
Oh, sure.
You have to have that engagement. And I always say when they're counting out loud, I'm like, I need to hear you get loud with their counting.
Sure.
Like, don't, it's like 1, 2, no, get in there, because it's such a centralizing thing to use your voice to count. It comes from here. Everybody has the diaphragm pushing the air out and everything else. It's such a centering mechanic in terms of using the voice to count and keep things in time, that if you got that, your whole body feels it.
I can't remember where I saw it. There was a study, and it had to do with, they had just like regular people, musicians and stuff, count and try to keep a steady rhythm, like just be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they found that non-musicians and musicians alike are actually really good at it. Like the variation isn't that strong. Now maybe after so much time it might drift or whatever, but for the most part it's really pretty straight. Like people, because we talk and we converse, that's how we use rhythm, and that's how we use rhythm when we talk. We use it to emphasize things. We can make something sound certain ways. We're just really good at noticing the little nuances with it, which is probably why when we hear bad rhythm like in music, that it doesn't make us dance or whatever, because we like, even non-musicians notice it, but yeah, it was just kind of interesting because you think like, man, you really try hard, and I don't know about you, but sometimes when you practice, you really get like bummed out about time.
Oh God, yeah, doing that today.
Yeah.
Still working on the sextuplets as 30-second notes, and
Oh
it's
yeah.
like depending on if I'm doing slurs, not a problem. But if I'm doing stuff where it's picking, it's like I just it drives, and then I
Yeah.
sit pull it out of the exercise, and I just sit there with the metronome, and it's fine. But I go back to the exercise, and it's like stumble, stumble, stumble. I lose that where the one is, and it's the psychological mind job of I've only been playing for 30 years and teaching this,
Oh
and I
yeah,
can't
it's rough.
freaking do it today. It's so annoying, but it's just part of the process. It's why we constantly practice. Nobody goes, I practiced for 20 years, I can just pick this up and do great.
Right.
It's no, I practiced for 20 years, and I know that if I don't touch this is not going to go well. So
Well, I mean, even the people I know that have like the best time, like Wayne Krantz or somebody like that, he records himself when he's practicing, and he just like gets mad at himself all the time. Like, here's a guy like, if you've ever heard him play, it's
oh
just
yeah,
he's so tight. Like it's so good. It's always in the pocket. Like it just feels so good, and it grooves really hard. But he's at a certain level where he hears things that we aren't hearing, even musicians aren't hearing a lot of times. Or maybe like we hear it but we don't really care. It's like it's so close that it sounds good. Or maybe we thought it was intentional. But he's like, well, I meant to do this. And here was the beat, and I just
just
was just here. And so I guess my point there is like he's been really good at it for probably a long time, like at least 30 years, and he still today practices every day with a metronome, you know, to get there because he doesn't want it to drift, and he's trying to get better at it.
exactly. And I think that's one of the big illusions is that you see the polish practice up on stage. Like no matter what level the performer is, they've had X amount of time in the practice room, and then they walk out on stage, and that's the public.
Oh yeah.
And that's kind of like the illusion is like, oh, these guys just sit around and they walk out there, and it's like, that's not what I mean. Even with pop music, the more I've gotten into the production of thing, the more it's just like they still practice their butts off. Like
Yeah.
they still work at it really dang hard. I might not particularly like it, but that's beside the point. The point is that they're working really hard to get that polished so that when they walk out there, there's no disconnect between sitting there in the room and walking out on the stage and having that level of dedication. And you don't get that big without having some drive to continually work at it.
Yeah.
It's not just,
That,
even
or,
though the Taylor's twists or whichever, it's like
sure.
she worked at it. It's
Still
great.
works at it. Yeah.
I mean, and that kudos to her for putting in that much time and continuously, and everybody else that's at that. Doesn't mean I'm going to throw on her album, as I'm driving ever, but just because it's not my style. Now I say that much. If she called me and needed a guitar player, I'd be okay. Let me know.
I mean, not so bad. Maybe it's because I have two little girls. Like I'm okay with basically any music at this point.
I'm generally, it's the same thing with my kids. They listen to just about everything. Though, I'll never forget the story of when I was playing Music for 18 Musicians by Steve Vai when Sam was like a year and a half, just had a diaper on and he's dancing to it. And if you've heard the piece, where what it sounds like. And Julie my wife walks into the house. She's like, "What are you doing to our son?" It's like, I'm like, "No, you don't get it. This is really, really cool." I mean, yeah, well, it's still going on, and he's dancing. So that was.
Oh man, my kids have heard so much different types of music. So I don't know that they'll ever like any of it, but they at least won't think it's weird or something. Maybe they think it's weird, but they're familiar with it. Like they really were. What you were saying earlier, before I forget, reminded me, and I think I told you about this. A friend of mine he was kind of inquiring. He kind of felt like he was a mid-level player. Whatever that means. And he's like, well, how do I become like an advanced player? And he was just kind of, and of course, in my abstract way of answering questions, I ask questions, but anyway, I kind of said, well, at first, I don't even know what that means. Like, what's an intermediate level player? Is Jimi Hendrix an intermediate level player because he doesn't know the harmonic major scale or something? Like, I don't know that he doesn't, but I'm just like, how are you measuring what that is? Like, how could you ever, like, because there's a little bit of that, like, well, what do you need to know to become not an intermediate player? I would say, by the way, that Hendrix is beyond, well beyond an intermediate player. He's fantastic.
You know, I'm gonna be a jerk right now,
Yeah.
and I'm gonna project one. It's on topic, but I was watching an interview with, I forget the pianist teacher's name, and he was saying the top piano player in 1932. I forget what his name was.
Like
Wouldn't make
or something.
I have no idea. Some German guy probably or something. I don't know. I mean, we could look it up, but I don't really care that much because the point of the story is that he was saying that like the top guy in 1932 wouldn't make it in an audition today at Juilliard. Like the best.
Yeah, let's get back to that in a second.
Okay,
That's an
so
interesting
let's
topic.
put that aside. Keep going.
Put that on the side because I know what you're talking about, which is really fascinating. But just to get back to the mid to advanced, what I ended up kind of doing and saying, well, just to give you an idea, I see it as like it's all these things you just got to work on. Like it never ends. And I basically gave him a list of like 15 things that are driving the heck out of me right now in my own playing, and that I have to come up with ways to figure out how to deal with those issues, because when I hear myself, it's not good enough. And I don't even know what level I would consider myself at this point. I think when you first get playing, maybe you think in that way for a while, but after you've been playing for a while, I really don't know what advanced versus like middle versus, I guess I know I'm not a beginner, I think.
One would hope, yeah.
But at the same time, I can think of so much stuff I need to work on. Like it's like an endless list of stuff I need to work on. So to your thing before, I don't remember how I got into this exactly, but it was kind of like, yeah, everybody's always working on stuff. You know, like Wayne Krantz still working on his time, and I'm sure he's working on his harmony, and he's working on all these other things. And Alan Holdsworth endlessly worked on stuff, and Steve Aaron's endlessly working on stuff and trying to get better. There's a laundry list of things we all do. So I would worry less about trying to be like mid-advanced, whatever that means, and just try to tackle the most important problem to you right now, you know?
Well, I think still on point is like the guitar player for what the heck is the band? Did Run Around, the harmonica tune.
I can hear it in my head. The Blues Traveler thing?
Blues Traveler, yes. The guitar player from Blues Traveler. You listen to the music, and you're like, that's what he's doing for most of it, and you're like, oh god, this guy's like average at best. And then I caught like a live show by them. I wasn't there. It was like 3 a.m. Austin City Limits or something like that, way back, probably like 1996 or something like that. And he had his solo, like the guitar player came out and gave a solo, and it was like, holy crap, this dude can play.
Right.
He's not just sitting there strumming chords because he's limited. He's strumming chords because
that's the job.
Money on. It's like, I'll take that. Sure. 3 chords. Yep.
Yeah.
That's how many. That's 6 zeros. I'll take that. Thank you.
Yeah.
He clearly likes it. And it's always that cycle of, you might not love it, but that paycheck really makes you like it. So you just do it anyway.
Sure.
It's to an extent. So the guy could really, really play. Like it was just and that kind of like my 18, 19-year-old self was just kind of like punched in the face with the reality of like, this guy doesn't suck. He's not limited. He's just serving the song, and that's what he's doing right there. He can clearly play his ass off. Well, now we lost our PG. Play it like crazy, but he's just doing what's serving the song. So you would rank him as an advanced player, but you just don't see that because he's hiding behind the veneer of pop music.
That's a whole nother topic. Like,
but I think that completely applies to what you were talking about in terms of like what's beginner, what's intermediate, and advanced. A buddy of mine used to say it's like there's a simplicity on the far side of complexity, and that's good. And I like that idea because it's like, I've done all this work in practice and going to school and all this heavy lifting, and yet playing like a simple etude beautifully is like awesome. And that simplicity, though, is after I've done all the hard work, and then I can put all those aspects into that piece. But at the same time, I'm not limited by my ability. It's like I can go out and do something else. And I think that's kind of the sign of an advanced player, is you're like, oh yeah, sure, I can do this, but I can also pull this off as well without having to think too much about it. And I think I would rather put it like, instead of like tiers, put it in terms of what is available to be played by them. Like a beginner is extraordinarily limited in what they can do. And an intermediate player is like, has like the ability to, like, okay, I can pop in the blues or jazz or a rock solo, or maybe a little bit of classical here, and I'm not too scared of reading some sight music. And then an advanced player, it's like the technique is through the roof in one particular thing. It's like
maybe I don't know.
Like, look at what's his name, Jared, the blues guy. He's on Instagram. Jared something, I'm gonna butcher it, but he's doesn't play with a pick. He plays with a custom Les Paul as one pickup. He just uses his finger. His tone is absolutely killer, and his blues licks are wildly good. But I wouldn't expect him to be able to pull off Bach without any serious work in there. Sure. It's like,
but I would not expect basically any classical guitarist to pull off his thing, right? Yeah.
And that's exactly my point. It's like you get so skilled and specialized in a particular thing, and that's a good thing. I don't think that's bad in any way, shape, or form. You got to do what you like.
Yeah.
But I think that advanced part of it is like knowing the confidence within that genre is what kind of can set you up as to, like, that advanced level. It's like super skilled in this, accessible for the rest.
Yeah. I still don't know if I know what that word means.
Yeah, well,
I mean, it's easy. I guess it's easy for me to apply it to other players, but to apply it to myself, I don't know how I would do that, because I don't know about you, but like the more I learn, the more stuff I want to get into too. So it's like the thing that I'm chasing, and the more I get into it, is the people that are really, really way up here, and to reach their level, it's like, well, if I reach somebody's level, there's another person like over here, and all of a sudden I'm back in the beginner spot, compared to this person up there. And it's always this constant search. So, and even like, it doesn't even, like, for me now, it does nothing to do with guitar either. Like, I'm looking at, Keith Jarrett and John Coltrane, and just like mind-boggling musicians, are like, I think I've told you, like, sometimes I compare my music and I'm like, it's so horrible because it's not Bartok, like, like that's like the level that I'm trying to shoot for or something. And
I think everybody, in one sense, if we could ask, just because I'm a Vai fanatic, if we could ask Steve Vai that same question, he'd probably say the same thing. He's probably like, oh yeah, there's this other guy that I just can't do his thing.
No, I'll never get there. Yeah, you just like, I'm a total noob compared to that person, right?
But I think that also the Pareto distribution. Granted, it's an economic thing, but it may have to do with the skill levels and everything else. The whole. Do you know what it is?
Yeah, the 80-20 thing, basically. Yeah,
the 80-20, like the 20%. If you have like a group of 10 people, 20% of them will do 80% of the work.
Yeah.
But that also keeps dividing. Like the top 20%, there's an 80-20 there, and you could hire and hire and hire and hire and hire. But maybe that completely goes with the musical ability and skill levels. It's like you have like your general 80%, but the top 20% practice more, to kind of bring it around to what we were talking about in the beginning, with the child prodigies just literally doing more work in that sense. And then that pays off. And then there's another group that practices more and has a different skill set and how they practice, or gets lucky and gets a phenomenal teacher. There's clearly an element of that goes into it too. And getting the right resources with that, and then that pushes them to the next tier, and then a whole other level up there, and so on. And it just keeps getting smaller and smaller. And there goes my super glue. But that's the.
It's interesting because art's so weird. I guess maybe that's part of my problem, is like, we're trying to put some, like, just because you maybe hit some like advanced level in some technique or something on guitar does not mean that you're a better guitar player than George Harrison or something, because he wrote some songs and played it in a certain way with a certain sound that just resonates with so many people. And
Mhm.
yeah, you can play something at 300 beats per minute or whatever, and it's impressive, but it doesn't, like, would you say that person's more advanced than him because technically they're better, but like musically are they better? It becomes a really fuzzy little line there, I think.
I think some of that has to do with like if you're living after the fact, you can't compare the influence to where you're at because you wouldn't be in that spot without him influencing you in some way. You know what I mean? It's like saying like, is Steve Vai a better? I keep using him. I hope he never hears this. Well, maybe I hope he does. You know, whatever. But you know,
He
you
sucks
hear,
anyway, so
yeah, exactly. You know, it's what the why is he using that pick thing? He should be using his fingers. But you know, you get this Steve Vai compared to Hendrix. You know, clearly he's technically head and shoulders above anything that Hendrix did. But there's no way he would be doing what he would be doing if Hendrix didn't do what he did. You know, it's like Hendrix like shifted the genre so much that the excellence in Hendrix's playing is that influence, you know, almost to an extent. It's like this guy shows up and then boom, everything shifts. You know, and
yeah, I mean, that's a tough one too because Steve Vai has never played a blues anywhere close to the level that Hendrix could, and from a technical standpoint too. He doesn't have the little nuances and stuff that are make it right, and the timing's not quite right. So it's kind of I don't know. Even there, I have a little bit of a hard time with it. But I know what you mean. I'm not trying to pick on
yeah,
you too
no, I
much.
get it.
Yeah.
But this is why we work well together. Yeah, but what about this little spot?
Yeah, right. Oh man, there was something I was gonna mention, and now I'm blanking on it. My memory's about this long these days, and it only used to be this long, but now it's this long.
Yeah, exactly. They're getting trapped in the house for X amount of time will do that. But I think that so like those types of comparisons are tough because they're just too one's on the other guy's shoulders. So you can't like I would consider Vi technically way superior, but it's not the same. It's like the first guy that cooked a steak versus Gordon Ramsay doing his what is it, beef Wellington. Well,
Yeah.
if the first guy didn't cook the steak, Wellington would be off the table. But Wellington's really freaking good outside of, you know, that skirt steak with just salt on it. So, but you can't have one without the other. And so I think maybe some of the skill gap or skill question has to do with like how much is based in the the guy that did it first, and then everybody else taking the reins and running with it.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's like you can't compare the guys that have run with it. But I think in one way, there's a qualitative way to do some of the guys that have all come up at the same time. You know, and that can kind of be a tell. You know, it's like, you know, it seemed like the G3, the original G3 with Eric Johnson, Satriani, and Steve Vai. Like those guys were the top pinnacle at the time. Yeah, there was Yngwie and Vinnie Moore and all
Right,
the other
of instrumental rock.
yeah,
Yeah, right.
but three very vastly different styles. But nobody argued their ability levels at all.
Sure.
So that's, I think, is a better argument or a more quantifiable argument than is, you know, ex-dead guitar player as good as this living guy now. It's like, well, that's not going to work because if that guy wasn't around, this guy wouldn't be doing what he's doing in this particular way. I don't think that's a good.
Yeah, I mean, we live in a world where everything influences and even like if you grew up at the same time and then that person did something and you saw them play, it could affect the way you play.
Oh yeah, totally. Like Eddie Van Halen would do the tapping thing with his back turned. At least the apocryphal stories of Eddie Van Halen. You know, it's
yeah, before everybody stole it. Yeah.
Yep.
I had my first guitar teacher, Frank Singer, great jazz guitar player, and pianist and sax player and arranger out of the Erie, Pennsylvania area. Check him out. He great years, everything, but I'm trying to remember who he said he studied with, and maybe if he hears this, he can let us know. But he went to Berklee College of Music and everything, and I want to say it was Charlie Banakis, who's a really famous teacher that like everyone who went to Berklee like tried to, if you're a certain kind of student, like would try to study with. But I swear, I think it might have been Charlie, but that he would go to every show he could go to. And it didn't matter if the band was like Keith Jarrett or if it was like the local punk rock band from middle school. And he said that every single time he went to a show, he learned something.
Mhm.
It didn't matter who it was. He would learn something from the like 10-year-old kid who just started playing guitar 5 weeks ago. And it was useful, like useful information. Like if you go to that show with the frame of mind that I'm open to learning something, it influenced his playing. Now, maybe I don't know what those things were, right? I'm hearing this
Yeah.
secondhand or whatever, but what
Just
those
tune the guitar
specific
before
things.
playing on stage.
Yeah, but it might have been like the way he expressed a note, or a certain way that the timing or something that happened at a certain moment in the song. And it's like, oh, I never thought about doing that before. And it was always that kind of way of learning. So to your point about like the people that come after, it's like you get all that, right? It's like you got to hear these things that that person didn't get to hear, and it's easy. It's kind of hard to compare the two because they get to hear something. Now, before we forget, to the topic on the Juilliard thing.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's where I was going
What was
with
the two that what's that show, two set or whatever, the violin?
yeah, the violin guys. Like
Yeah,
they're all
they were doing that too. They were going through all the like old violin virtuosos, and they were kind of laughing. They're like, we would never get away with that, like in Bach, like that guy's doing the
yeah.
way he was being like more romantic with it or whatever. And I'm trying to remember which person it was, but it was kind of funny to hear because they were like, you can't take Bach now and play it like romantic like that. You can't like play it with this kind of vibrato, and you need to, it's very like to the letter of the law sort of. Somebody made some rules at some point between 1930 and now that everyone had to follow.
Yep.
Yeah, and like, well, would that person that was the greatest pianist in 1932 or whatever be able to be even into school, or something now? Chances are yes. I'm thinking that's probably a little extreme, but
Well, I think the guy that was making the point, saying like he wouldn't make it past the audition, it wasn't necessarily that it was the quality of the pieces, because you still had access to Beethoven and everything up into the 30s,
yeah.
but it's more in terms of his technique. He's like, his lack of precision compared to the kids today is dramatically different, which is just like, really, so that opens up that can of worms of so many different questions. Like, is it a matter of accessibility to great teachers? What defines good technique? Liszt was around before him, so
Right.
And Liszt clearly has an incredible reputation as a pianist, but we don't have a recording, so we don't know.
Well, but yeah, right. Yeah, how good was Liszt? I saw something about that too. It was like, how good was Liszt really?
Yeah, and it's like, was it a presto back then, a presto as we consider it today?
Yeah.
Because move that quick, or how did he take it? Regardless, he clearly was good because he get the reputation, especially with the lack of internet resources that we have today compared to back then. It's like, if you're getting a good reputation, you're getting a good reputation because the results are there and everybody's seeing it, and there's newspaper articles, and that took a lot more energy to put a newspaper article out back then than it does today, where you can just hop on your phone and type it in real time.
Things were so different though, like quote unquote classical music, which I despise that term in general, because it's a useless term, really. I guess it's not useless, but it already like puts somebody in a frame of mind of what they're going to listen to, which kind of stinks. But like when Liszt was playing, he was essentially doing what like I do now, like he was playing to like groups of people and like improvising and making up songs and sharing, and it wasn't always like concerts and stuff. Sometimes it was just like in a bar or whatever, sort of, it was a lot more like loose, and like they could be like 5-hour shows just playing all night,
Yeah.
And that's such a different vibe than the current like classical world, where you don't see that very often.
A rare performer that does it. Dians did it. Lafreras.
Yeah, where there's like show up at at a bar or something and go play.
I don't know if he showed up at a bar, but he definitely
to that sort of idea, right? Where there's like, hey, I'm teaching at college and I'm just gonna start playing, and then you get a group of people because you're good. They come around and hang out, and you just play all night. And I guess my point there is like, so maybe Liszt wouldn't have had like the speed of a lot of the new players, which there's basically no chance he did, because the new pianists, like, this, we're so good at like creating this technique now that it's unbelievable. But I am almost certain he could improvise way better than most of those people, you know, and probably could make up great music all the time, you know. Like Liszt is one of my favorites. He used to like get music from all over the world too. Like he'd have people send him music, and he would study it and try to put it into his music. And he's like this very like worldly figure. It wasn't so closed-minded or whatever. So he was always looking at folk music from different cultures and learn it. Like he would learn it and play around with it and tinker. Anyway. Yes.
No, that's a good. I don't know. We're still talking about.
So who's more skilled, Liszt in that situation, or the new? I don't really know a lot of the new pianists, and I don't want to name the ones I do know because I think they're pretty cool. Who's better? You know, is this person like this person's advanced now, but Liszt is just intermediate? You know, like that doesn't.
Transcendental etudes are killer for, and I've never heard anybody go, "Oh yeah, that was easy." Yeah. It's more like, "Oh God, please Lord, please let me just play this piece and let it go." You know, those are monsters.
For those who only think of Liszt as like blazing virtuosic stuff, I suggest you go revisit. There's so much just like stunningly beautiful music.
Oh yeah,
it's not always like just twinkle figures or whatever. It's just there's some great stuff.
Yeah, it's absolutely brilliant, absolutely. And but that's the other thing too. It's like, you know, tying it in a little bit with a Pareto distribution. He was at the top of the top of the top.
Yeah,
and so that clearly leads to a huge amount of influence. So everybody else is going to pick up on his coattails with that and push to the next level. And that goes with like, what's going to be how do you get to the next level now? Like, where is it next? You know, there's such a great, huge amount of skill, and it's awesome to see. Like, I love it. That's the one thing that grabs me if I open up my Instagram, which is like the only social media I allow myself to have on the phone.
And it's been very friendly to guitar. It's very
totally
good guitar thing. I mean, you can get overwhelmed by it a little bit, but
yes, sometimes it makes you want to quit. But at the same time, you know, I guess a healthy aspect is like, you know what, that's their shtick, that's their thing. I'm going to keep doing my own thing because that's it. You know, that's the only thing that I got to worry about keeping happy. My own musical abilities and my own thing. And I'd love to be able to do half of this. It's like I have electric guitar envy all the time watching these guys do some of the stuff that they do. It's like, oh, that's just wickedly cool. I'd love to do that. But, you know, then I start revisiting some Bach or learning a new Bach, and it's like, you know, I really like this. This is just wickedly cool. You know,
and I do the same. I mean, I hear, like, I don't really have a very good acoustic. I have I have a Ramirez classical guitar, which is pretty nice. But yeah, like, it's like, there's so many good acoustic-y things. Like, I get annoyed sometimes being, like, stuck in electric land. Mm-hmm. Like, it kind of stinks in a way to primarily play an instrument that requires power, you know? And it's kind of weird because we're in this time frame, too. Like, when you think about that, too, like, it's mind-boggling. Like, 100 years ago that wouldn't existed. 100 years from now it probably won't exist. We're in this weird little niche where like my identity is tied to this electronic device. You know, it's it's going to probably be a very short-lived thing ultimately, you know. But yeah, and any other time I would have been born, it wouldn't exist. So I don't know, I feel you. So you know, sometimes I look at the acoustic stuff, but then, you know, you plug into one of these.
Yeah, you got the hard plate there, and that's kind of sexy.
And you plug into that, and you hear that sound, and you feel it, and the house shakes a little bit, and the cops start coming, and it's just awesome.
Yeah, exactly. You know, I can't get that loud with a classical. It's not even close.
Oh, I wish. You know, I think if acoustic guitars were as loud as violins, I would have a lot less need for an electric guitar.
But that is one of the crazy conundrums. Is the body side of the guitar has grown, but the volume level hasn't gone that much higher.
Right.
Like, I've seen a parlor guitar that was wickedly loud, and the thing was a size, like, you know, a little bit bigger than a half-size guitar, and it was like, holy crap, what the heck? Like, what? My guitar is double the size of that, and it's barely competing, you know. That it's and granted, it was by the same manufacturer or same luthier. It was this is a Thames, and the guy that was doing the period guitar, Thames copied like a famous parlor guitar. I don't want to say Lanoa or whatever how you pronounce it. I'm butchering that, but he copied a Torres. Is that it? I think he copied a Torres, and it was just crazy. And the guy that was doing the recording, Gary Stewart, I did the engineering on it. It was like a period album. So he did like the Albanese arrangements, and he played without nails, and he did it on gut strings on this parlor guitar. And the thing sounded like a piano, like in volume and in tone, like, because without the nails, lost any type of harsh edge to it, and it sounded like it was just kind of like a hammering on the strings with that. And he would take olive oil and dip it onto his fingertips and then play the guitar, because that's how they kept, because the calluses would catch on the strings otherwise. Anyway, so yeah, it's just that's like another crazy thing, the way the instruments change and over time, and how much does that affect what the results are in terms of playing. Because if an instrument gets easier to play, the skill level is going to go way, way, way up. You know, I wonder if there is a difference in terms of piano action, in terms of key playability from like the turn of the century to now. It's kind of a rhetorical question. There's going to be a huge
even like when Liszt was alive, they actually changed the piano during his life, because players like him were destroying the old like Beethoven era pianos, right? They just weren't quick enough, and they couldn't take the beating, and they weren't as dynamic. And so they actually had the modern sort of piano started then. But I'm sure that the design has gotten better, and the engineering and progress and all that stuff.
My composition professor, James Wilding, remarked, because I was looking into helping a church find a new piano and stuff like that, and it's like he's like, well, if you're gonna get a piano, get a newer one. Like he's like, it's the opposite of the guitar. Like for guitarists, you know, it's like a 1940 Martin is like, you know, this incredible instrument. He's got this booming voice to it, and he's like, if it was a piano, it'd be a piece of garbage. You know, like my paraphrase on what he's saying. He didn't say exactly that, but the newer, like if you get a brand new piano, it is like stellar compared to something 10 years old, you know. So it's just one of those catches. Now it's super Steinway or whichever is like you're taking out 3 mortgages to pay for it, or whatever. But there's a reason for that, I guess. Anyways, so maybe we can dive into instruments and everything else for another.
I want to do that in the future,
because we should probably hit our what are we listening to? This is a new section that we're doing. Everybody is, what are we listening to a lot of now? And what are some cool little things that we've seen on Instagram in the past week? So you want to go first? Let's go with the listening first, because that's easy. And then we can see if we can pull something out with Instagram.
Yeah, what have I been listening to? I guess I should have done some homework. Why don't you go while I look at my phone?
Easy.
Well, so one of the things I know I've been listening to is I'm working on my album. So there's just been a lot of like, when you're doing that and mixing and everything, it's like it's hard to listen to other stuff a little bit.
Oh yeah, totally. I hear you on that. I mean, this is relatively easy for me to. The things that I'm listening to for pleasure are that the new Thraikill, Thrailkill EP called Detach. That has been like on repeat like crazy for me lately. I love it. Crazy prog stuff, killer tone, killer grooves, loving it. And then there's another one called band called Sordid Pink, Sordid Pink, and David Maximimic is the guitar player for that, and he does a ton of solo guitar work, which is really cool. This electronic electric metal thing that's going on, that is, I love his writing. And so when he got together with a singer and did a full vocal album, I was looking forward to it, and it's great. It's just like him, but with great vocals over top of it, which it's very tough to pull off, because I've seen other guys try to do that, where they come out with an instrumental album, then added a vocalist, just like mistakes were made, and then they ditch the vocalist and keep going with her. So those are like those two, and then clearly, the Liquid Tension Experiment 3 preview track, that takes me back to being 21, trying to do all that stuff. The reasons I bought a 7-string with Petrucci doing it, and it's great. I think they're capturing the old vibe. I'm really looking forward to it. So.
Yeah, I was happy to hear that tune. Yeah, it was fun. I listened to it once, and then I kind of listened through it to learn. Like I was kind of figuring out. It's like, oh, I'm sitting here. I'll put the song on, and I'll figure it out. So yeah, that was fun to listen to. I guess what I listened to this week, I kind of went into jazz mode this week. One of the albums I was listening to, and some of these are older. Was this Kenny Garrett album, Pursuance. Kenny's a saxophone player. It's actually a really cool album because Pat Metheny plays on it. Oh, it's one of Kenny's first things, and it's a tribute to John Coltrane. But it's really good. Like, Kenny plays alto sax, and it sounds like a tenor. Like, he's got just like the richest, awesome sound. And it's just, all the playing on that album is like mind-boggling. It's just mind-bogglingly good. I was also apparently in Scofield land for a bit. I was kind of looking. I'm not a huge fan of like the 80s, 90s Scofield or early 90s. That there's like a time there. I just can't really get into that vibe. And I really like anything like post 96 or something like that. I've been a big fan of. But I never really listened to like a lot of the 70s stuff. So I kind of went back and listened to, there's a live album he did. I think it's just called Live or something. It's like from 97. Or maybe it's Out Like a Light or so. I think maybe it's that. Anyway, that was pretty cool. And it was kind of cool to hear, like I said, I kind of skipped that 80s, 90s stuff to hear what he was doing in the 70s to what he's doing in the 2000s, that sort of like 20 or so, 20, 25 year gap. It's cool to hear what he was doing that's the same and what's different and how it's evolved. And he actually kind of looks like he sort of went from the 70s to the 80s, went somewhere else for a little bit, and then kind of came back to a sort of a similar vibe and stuff later. So I really liked it. It was cool. So those are probably the big ones.
Cool. Anything interesting on Instagram?
I've kind of get into like seeing what like Josh Smith and those guys do. I'm not always like crazy into the albums, but like I could watch Josh Smith play like just like messing around on his guitar for like all day. Exactly. It's so good. He's amazing.
I just had No, keep going. If you got.
I was saying, and congratulations for you got a signature model thing. I'm sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. Sweet it looks guitar. Sweet too. It looks great. Yeah. I was just I had a couple of comments that were recognized by Johannes Mueller, the classical guitar guy. He's absolutely brilliant because he's been doing these comparison videos between a regular fretted guitar and the True Temperament ones, and playing selections of pieces, and you can hear the difference with it. Like the first video that he did was the BWV 1006. That's all I know. I haven't learned that one.
I know. I know at least by sound. Yeah.
He played that, and then he did the what's where to put it? The La Sueña, the Barrios del Sueño, the tremolo piece. That was his latest one, doing the True Temperament and the regular fretting. And it's interesting to hear the difference. It's a very, very subtle difference, but like if you've been playing for a while, you can totally hear it. Like the True Temperament is more consonant, even though regardless of what the harmony does, it's just like there's a lack of a dissonant edge to it compared to like the regular guitar. It's just that sounding more in tune lets it sound more in tune, and I guess that's redundant and clearly redundant. It sounds more in tune because the notes are more in tune. Yeah. But I think it's like, since we're so used to hearing that little bit of dissonance that's unavoidable on every other instrument, that when that's gone, it's like, oh, that it's kind of nice. It's pleasant. It's definitely.
Have you noticed it? it almost doesn't sound like guitar for like you lose a little, which I like. Actually, it's like it's kind of, once you kind of get used to it, it's sort of like preferred. But
Yeah.
yeah, when the thirds are actually like in tune and everything,
Yeah, exactly.
it's kind of a funny thing. Yeah.
What's it, guys? Something Ekud, Matthias Ekud.
Oh, Matthias Eklund. Yeah.
Yeah, I was close. I had letters in
Oh,
his
he's
name.
amazing. Freak guitar.
Yeah,
Look that guy
yeah,
up.
yeah. He's
Amazing.
incredible.
Amazing.
But like when he did that demo of the True Temperament, like that was him hitting the fourth fret harmonic, G sharp, and the fretted G sharp, and it being completely in tune was like, oh, that's just cool.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay. You don't realize how.
Have you seen his videos on YouTube?
Yeah.
Like he puts stuff out like every couple of days, and they're just awesome. And he's like, oh, and there's a lot of the Indian like counting stuff.
Yep.
He's like, oh, this I'm gonna play this. He'll like play a thing, then he kind of talks about it. And he's like, oh yeah, this is in 27/16, and it's broken up like this, and he kind of counts through it and shows you what it's like, and shows you how to play it. And it sounds amazing. And it's neat, cool sounding.
Yeah, it's very, very.
Before I forget, it's not Instagram, but Mike Moreno. Are you familiar with Mike Moreno?
No.
He's a jazz guitar player, like the modern like guitar players. Great player. He's been doing, it's like every week he has another like New York City jazz guitar player or pianist or another instrument come to his house, and they do a live show. And it's just like Mike Stern was on it like a couple weeks ago, and it's only live for like 3 days or whatever, that kind of thing. But definitely check that out, because it's awesome. Most of the time it's just like two guitar players playing, and it's great.
Is that on YouTube?
Yeah, on YouTube. I think that's the only place it is. Yeah, so Mike Moreno, if you haven't checked him out, unbelievably wonderful guitar player. So much depth. Mike's also it's really cool to like follow him on Instagram too. He's one of those people that like jazz is full of all these standards, and like let's say it's Stella by Starlight or something, and he'll do the examination of the current sort of like version of it, but then like trace it back to the original version, show you the differences in the chords and like how it's evolved over time, and like how the melodies changed and stuff. And so like the original version might have used this chord, but then when it went to the bebop era, it kind of got this chord, and then this happened. And it's kind of neat to see the sort of like history of it. So worth checking out as well.
Awesome. Yep, that wraps up our listening and Instagram and everything else ranting. Next week, we're going to talk about what Tim kind of touched about a little bit today, just mixing and editing down his album, and mixing and editing and production and being a musician and all that. Wonderful.
See, I'm the improviser. He's like all planned out, like everything's all planned.
Yeah,
I'm thinking like, I don't know, whatever you want to do, we're cool.
Yeah, no, we're diving into that aspect of stuff.
Oh, I wanted to say before I forgot, I know we're wrapping up, like, thanks everyone who's liked our we started a Facebook page. People are subscribing to the YouTube. The podcast should be on hopefully all of your favorite podcasts.
It's all signed up, and every email that I got says that it's there. So
I guess let us know if it's not on one of the ones you like, and then we can try to track it down. I don't know what we can do about it. Some of them you could like submit the RSS feed and stuff, and maybe they just weren't on the list of what we were doing. But let us know if you can't find it. And there is a website for it too. I can't remember what it was, but you can find it from our Facebook page. So if you look up WoodAirMetal, you can find us on Facebook.
And YouTube. And
YouTube.
We have an Instagram? We don't have an Instagram
yet.
No
Instagram yet.
Yeah, I mean, we could link the Facebook to it, but
I think at some point we'll try to do more with the YouTube channel. We're just sort of getting this going, but where we can put more than just the blog post on it. So follow us on here. So subscribe, press the like and the bell thing or whatever.
Give us a thumbs up, all that other stuff.
Let us know. But I think we'll try to put some like cool videos. Maybe at some point we'll share like some of the gear we have or something, and it could be like little videos or I don't know, whatever.
Yeah, whatever. Well, the sky's the limit,
No limitation.
Exactly. All right. Catch y'all later.
All right. Later.